reading from Unfinished Lives. On a foggy Wednesday, March the 14th, 2007, the eve of the Ides of March, two young Polk County men killed Ryan Keith Skipper in cold blood. William David Brown Jr., the 20-year-old nephew of Skipper's landlord, and Brown's friend, Joseph Eli Bearden, age 21, chose knives for their act of assassination. Cassius and Brutus, the first century CE Roman conspirators, also drew their knives and cut down Julius Caesar in the Senate House. But Brown and Bearden are hardly noble Romans, though their purpose was just as bloody-minded. They were hard-luck gators up to no good, Central Florida white boys, with little insight into themselves and even less ambition beyond drinking, violence, theft, and getting high in their trailer park homes. Both were known methamphetamine addicts and small-time crooks. Bearden had served time for grand theft auto and had pled no contest to charges of battery when he was a teen. Brown had been arrested just 6 days prior to the Skipper murder for cyber stalking and had 4 previous arrests in Polk County. Their intended mark was a gentle, fun-loving 25-year-old native of the Auburndale area who lived with 2 girlfriends he loved like sisters in a little red rental house at 211 Richburg Road. To the redneck conspirators, Ryan Skipper was an uppity queer who flouted his new car and his big shopping mall job, and he needed what they were about to give him: several inches of sharp steel. Folk wisdom says that the last thing a murdered person sees at the moment of death is imprinted on the tissues of the eye. Were that image retrieved and reproduced, then the dead could speak beyond the grave. We could see the killer. The residue of murder leaves indelible images of the victim too, seared into the emotional memories of those who loved him. When someone so beloved and so loving is cut down savagely as Ryan Skipper was, the whole event of him is seared into the tissues of the souls he touched while he was still alive. Murder doesn't make a person better or worse than he was in life. It can, however, make him unforgettable. Ryan had many hearts in his keeping. Dozens called him my best friend. They each loved him specifically, differently, and he loved them back the same way. That was Ryan's gift, to focus his concern and care so fully on each of his lovers and friends that they seemed not to mind all the others. Instead, they seek each other out this very day so as to not forget and to celebrate who and what he was. The lakeside home of his mother Pat and stepfather Lynn draws them like a magnet, and reflections of Ryan flicker back and forth in the stories they tell, in their laughter, in the memories they share, and in the way each of them seems to tend a wound that just cannot quite heal. Ryan's portrait is a mosaic made up of mirrors, showing other things besides glimpses of the boy and the man and his strengths and weaknesses. It reveals something of the people who knew him, something else again of the troubled county in Florida where they continue to live after his murder, and something even more sinister than that. Looking into the life and death of this young man exposes something about a culture so disordered that it frequently cannibalizes its own young, especially when they are homosexual. First, by way of apology, excuse me. Let me say that at the conclusion of service, if you see me getting smaller, I'm leaving. That's one of my favorite country music lyrics. It also goes, if the phone ain't ringing, it's me. I'm supposed to participate in the ordination of John O'Neill to the Christian ministry at Northway Christian Church on Northwest Highway in Dallas, Texas. And it's at 2 o'clock. So I'm going to get out of here like my tail is on fire and my head's catching. So thank you all very much for the warmth of your welcome, to Linda Ice for this marvelous invitation, to Seth Wildman for being so good about this, for the music with the carol and the whole group of you did. It's absolutely brilliant. Congratulations on your trip to China. Thank you to your own version of Garrison Keeler. Stan does a great job, doesn't he? And to Dr. Susie Gore. Congratulations, Susie Gore, becoming the New Faith organizer for the Texas Freedom Network, a wonderful team down in Austin, Texas. Watch out, Austin, here she comes. I had the great privilege of working together with her upon the completion of her degree at Brite, and she's going to be a great blessing for all of us down in Austin. My friend Russ, Dalton, and family. Russ, Lisa, and the family are here. Russ is a professor of religious education at Brite Divinity School. Along with Russ, I want to extend the welcome from Brite to all of you here. And I want to say it was such a delight to see Don Jackson. Don is one of the tall trees of social justice in Texas, not just here in Fort Worth, but Don, thank you for coming. And all of the friends here who are at the Center for Theological Activism, I see you around here. If we keep meeting like this, people are going to start talking. They'll say we're in love. After my thank yous, I'll get right to the point, and this will be a rather abrupt switch in mood. The conversation on violent LGBTQ hate crimes must change. The statistics are daunting. Since the early 1980s, over 14,000 documented cases of women, men, girls, and boys who have been murdered because of heterosexism, homophobia, transphobia, and gender hatred have occurred in these United States. And those are just the ones we claim to know of officially. Behind the imprecision of that number is what everyone from the FBI to the National Coalition of Anti-Violence Programs acknowledges as a severe undercount of murdered queer folk. We know there are more, many, many more. The statistics for 2013 just came out this week from the NCAVP. This past annual period, 2013, registered over 2,000 violent anti-LGBTQ attacks in these 50 states. We know that there are many more whose deaths have gone unreported by anyone to anyone, whose broken-hearted loved ones suffer in isolation because the host of the dead flicker past the public consciousness like nightshades, virtually unacknowledged. When the statistics we do have point to an epidemic of bias-driven hate crime murders perpetrated against the last group in America, it is still politically correct to dehumanize and to harm LGBTQ people. And I say this on the very first day of LGBT History Month, duly and officially proclaimed by President Obama. These are no ordinary murders, as hateful to us as every homicide surely must be. These are anti-LGBTQ hate crimes. These crimes specifically target the LGBTQ community. These are not murders in the heat of passion or the result of domestic dispute. They are not for money or for drugs. These are message killings. intended to terrorize the whole population of the LGBT community, queer people. For those uncomfortable with the term queer, believing it to be too tainted to use in any positive way, my use of queer is in its original functional sense: to disrupt, confound, overturn, or likewise impeach what is presumed to be normal. Queer people, lesbians, gay men, bisexual people, transgender and gender variant people, and all of our heterosexual allies, in fact, do queer everything from sexuality to marriage to religion. The impact of these anti-queer murders, then, is muffled by the determination of the status quo to reimpose its control through establishing norms by which everyone is expected to live. So the status quo, when confronted by the fact of these heinous murders, marshals its legal definitions, statistics, and the national obsessive distraction over values and religion that often gets described as the culture wars in order to smother the consciences of Americans before they get too concerned about the fate of their queer neighbors. Now, I'm not here today to offer critiques of those social, legal, law enforcement, and moral definitions of what constitutes these crimes in specialized areas of thought or the issues that surround them. Let others do that. I'm here first and foremost to say that though the law has changed concerning LGBTQ hate crimes in this country, the conversation about LGBTQ hate crimes has not changed, and it must. Why? Because queer folk are dying every day in these United States because of rational fear, misunderstanding, and hatred. I don't know about you, but the sound of silence around these thousands and thousands of murders is too painful for me to bear. Unless we find a way to move the human heart, the subject of hate crimes against queer folk will stay right where it is now, in statute books, in courtrooms, in academic classrooms, under an avalanche of email and papers on lawmakers' desks, and it will not move into a public consciousness where things may finally change. If the conversation remains so far from the lives of everyday people, nothing will change, because only mental attention will be paid to a crisis stealing the lives of neighbors, classmates, co-workers, and friends from every state and locality in the nation. Put a finer point on it, the 2014 statistics will include a gay man who was a senior at TCU, murdered just down here at the Grand Park, the story of which has been suppressed by authorities from the university through the city. But it occurred just around the corner. You know, that silence, the effacing and erasure of these memories, is an outcome I cannot live with. I wrote the book that I wrote, in part because I felt I could not permit such negligence to go unchallenged. I hope to challenge that conversation, and I want to invite you into it in 5 brief ways. First, the law has changed, but the culture of violence has not changed. We must have the conversation about that injustice. Since President Barack Obama signed the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act into law in October of 2009, the killing of LGBTQ people in America has refused to let up. Just because we've not heard about it in the Star Telegram and in the Dallas Morning News does not mean that it is not going on. As a matter of fact, the largest spike of these assassinations of queer folk took place in the month that followed the passage of the Matthew Shepard Act. And in every year since 2009, these murders have continued to mount in ever larger historic numbers. Out of the stories I tell in my book, More than half of the 14 stories were seriously bullied persons in grade school and in middle and high school because of their sexual orientation, their gender expression, and their gender identity. Long after the furor over these suicides in schools dies down, then you and I, who are the storytellers in our communities, because we are part of the community of faith, must tell and retell the stories of bullied teens like Scotty Joe Weaver from Bay Minette, Alabama, and Charlie Howard from Bangor, Maine, who faced so much hell on earth just to attend school in these United States. We must tell and retell these stories until we change the culture of violence that permits school administrators and teachers to ignore or even participate in the bullying of LGBTQ youth, setting the hallmark by which these murders will be carried out in the future. 2. The dead virtually fall murdered on our doorsteps, yet the press, the churches, and even the LGBTQ community itself pretends not to notice. This must stop. Thousands have died in the 15 years since Matthew Wayne Shepherd was bludgeoned to death into a fatal coma and hogtied to a buck fence overlooking Laramie, Wyoming. But the news of so many thousands of the murdered still goes virtually unnoticed. Matthew's story, you see, is the first account of an anti-LGBTQ hate crime the vast majority of us ever heard about. Matthew's story moved us 15 years ago, and it moves us now. But telling Matthew's story has had unintended consequences. It has sucked all the oxygen out of the media and out of our attention span so that we no longer hear any other stories than anyone else. You see, if the victims of hate crimes are not so young anymore, or if they're not boyishly attractive, I believe the term among my gay male brothers is cute. If they are black, brown, female rather than male, or gender variant in expression or appearance, that is, overly thuggish if female, or too femme if male, then the news story gets buried beneath the fold of the paper, or it drifts away into cyberspace, or it doesn't get told at all. In the case of black, lesbian, aggressive teenage Sakia Latona Gunn from Newark, New Jersey, for example, one news media analysis of the year following her stabbing death at a Newark, New Jersey bus stop found that all news stories about her numbered 28. While in the comparable period for Matthew Shepherd, stories appearing only in major newspapers, numbered 735. And if all the articles about Matt were counted up in all media during the same period, they would surely number in the thousands. I am not suggesting that Matthew Shepherd not receive the attention that his death deserves. And the courageous action of his mother, Judy Shepherd, needs to be sounded to the hills. What I am saying is that there are many more stories that we must learn to tell. Third, the conversation about transphobia and the slaughter of transgender and gender variant people has to begin, finally. I tell 5 such stories in my book of persons who lived on the spectrum of gender nonconformity, and they paid the ultimate price for it. Anti-transgender hate crimes have taken a fearful new turn in the last 5 years, with rising rates of murder among femininely presenting teenage boys of color, but the stories of our sisters and brothers in the trans community, no matter their race or ethnicity, are chronically ignored by the media or are sensationalized by references to the way they dressed or the way they used cosmetics or their body modifications. These people were not reducible to one or two human characteristics. They were as human as I am and as human as you are, and they believed that they needed love just like we. Our sisters and brothers like Navajo Two-Spirit F.C. Martinez Jr. from Cortez, Colorado, died with a crushed skull in a canyon a quarter-mile from his home. They all deserve to be remembered with honor and their lives counted as worthy as the lives of any conformer. I never will forget the way that his mother, Pauline, looked at me when she took hold of the lapel of my jacket and said, "Do not let them forget my child." 4. The slow-rolling decimation of the queer community continues, but we use the same tired cliches to speak about it. We must change the way we speak about how our murdered sisters and brothers died if we are to change the society that set the conditions that killed them. Hate crimes murders are not tragedies. May I say that again? Hate crimes murders are not tragedies. I had to break myself of calling these killings by this maudlin term, and I believe so must we all. These stories are not tragedies. They are outrages against human civilization. They are hate crimes. To call an anti-LGBTQ hate crime a tragedy is somehow to suggest that the victims of these particularly brutal homicides are unfortunate people or tragic figures. The language creates such a distance between us and them that their stories can simply be toted up as object lessons of some kind to imply that some or all of the 14,000 of our dead fell to bad luck, poor planning, or questionable behavior is first of all to exempt ourselves from having to take any of them seriously. And secondly, to assign a subtle form of social superiority to us. Because, of course, we would never be in such a tragic situation, would we? None of the people whose stories I tell intended to put themselves in harm's way. You know what they were looking for? They were looking for the same thing all of us look for. They were looking for love and acceptance. They were looking for adventure and life. They were vitally, vibrantly alive, and somebody targeted them because of who they were. No one who has died from irrational hatred had it coming. Hate killers like to get in close. They like to use their hands to do their bloody work. I found that in over half of the anti-LGBT killings since 1995, the brutality visited on the victims involved some combination of shooting, stabbing, garroting, and bludgeoning. And in many cases, like that of Scotty Joe Weaver, the perpetrators desecrated the bodies of the victims after they had died. Yet nothing I can say equals quite the existential horror of the moment in which my friends Lynn Mulder and Pat Mulder went to the funeral home carrying clothes with which to clothe Ryan Skipper, their boy, only to be told by the mortician that probably they needed to go back home and choose another shirt, one with a higher collar, so that it would cover the wounds in their boy's neck. 5. Religion is the chief accomplice of those who kill LGBTQ people. But faith communities in America would rather debate whether queer folk are going to hell or not. Hell is right here on earth for the victims of hate crime murder, and it is high time that we had the religion conversation around anti-LGBTQ hate crimes. While every form of homegrown prejudice in this country has a religion dimension to it, according to Gene Robinson, the now retired Episcopal Bishop of New Hampshire, says that 9 out of 10 hate crimes killers try to justify the murder they do against queer folk by using the Bible, church teachings, the words of a religious authority, or their supposed understanding of orders that came to them from God. Ken Cummins' murderer, who stalked, tortured, and killed Ken in Houston, Texas, and offered up his body as a burnt offering to God, claimed he was doing the work of the prophet Elijah because God told him to eliminate an abominator. So Ken's killer took his lifeless body out to a dry stock tank in the country near San Antonio and burnt his remains as a religious holocaust on charcoal briquettes that he bought at a country convenience store. Mel White, the founder of Soul Force, said of Ken Cummins' murder, "This death is just one more smoking gun found at the scene of another hate crime caused directly by Christian fundamentalist leaders whose obsessive anti-homosexual campaign leads to tragic consequences they will not admit." Soul Force has been saying for years that their rhetoric leads to suffering and death, and now, once again, we have the sickening evidence to prove it. Folks, I'm a person of faith, and basically I am an upbeat and optimistic person. Yet my work on these stories makes me cringe at the ease with which hateful people can so easily hijack the religion I love to discriminate against LGBTQ people, and when push comes to shove, use that gospel to justify cold-blooded murder with a seemingly forgiven demeanor and a clear conscience. I'm tired of it. There is some religious or spiritual aspect to every story I tell in this book from across the country, and it is beyond time to change the religious conversation about the lives and the deaths of queer folk. You see, these are more than good stories to me. These are the voices of people who somehow, in the course of writing this manuscript, became my teachers. They taught me about how sweet my own life is. Sweet life, good life, true life, real life, the same life that you and I may take for granted, but love so dearly. And so these stories are ultimately not about death at all. They are about communities of resistance, communities of hope, communities of remembrance and memory who've risen up around every one of these victims remembered in the United States of America to give us the opportunity to say never again. And to stand by the side of every person of difference, every racial ethnic minority, every minoritized and demeaned person, and say no more. In closing, I want you to know that the story of Ryan Keith Skipper, while one of the saddest I know, ended in an extraordinary way. His older brother Damien became my friend. Damien married a beautiful person from Southern California. They've had 2 children since. And I have in my possession a beautiful photograph taken at the gravesite of Ryan Skipper. Ryan had a beautiful stone put there by his parents with the words of 1 Corinthians 13 right on it, and a rainbow at the top. There in that photograph I see Damien and his wife, Pat, Lynn, and a beautiful little girl dressed in the cutest little dress you can imagine, playing on the grave of her uncle, because her name is Ryan Skipper. You see, every time we tell the story of one of these people, we manage to frustrate the intention of the killers. The killers intended to obliterate the memory of this person and to terrify the whole community they represented. But in telling these stories, just like Damien in naming his daughter Ryan, these people live in our hearts. If there's been something in this brief presentation that has shocked you, I do not apologize. If there is something here that has made you cry, now you know how I feel. And if there's something here that stirs you up to resistance and hope, then I suspect that this is going to be a sermon of our seed. Grace and peace to you.